Young and the Restless Predictions. Victor betrays Audra and she plots payback. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone is having a nice day. Before we begin the video, please subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Young and the Restless Predictions this week include Victor Newman, Eric Braeden, Audra Charles, Zalika Silver, and Billy Abbott, Jason Thompson. Also Chelsea Lawson, Melissa Claire Egan, Lely Winters, Crystal Khalil, Devon Hamilton, Brayton James, and Sharon Newman, Sharon Case, Nick Newman, Joshua Morrow, Tracy Abbott, Beth Maitland, and Alan Laurent, Christopher Cousins. Lie and R spoilers reveal that Victor will outsmart Audra in his revenge plot against the Abbotts. Billy Abbott is likely to jeopardize his relationship with Chelsea Lawson while getting romantically closer to Lely Winters. Sharon Newman may face a bipolar crisis, with her ex-husband Nick Newman ready to provide emotional support. Moreover, Lely Winters may side with Billy, sparking a dispute with Devon Hamilton. Tracy Abbott's romantic entanglement with Alan Laurent could lead to her staying in Paris, potentially exiting the show with Alan and Ashley Abbott, Eileen Davidson. Watch out for the next week's spoilers to see how these predictions unfold. These Young and the Restless Predictions from Belinda are always based on official opera spoilers and recent episode drama. You can get daily updates 7 days a week on all your favorite operas right here. Victor Newman had always been a man who played by his own rules, someone who never shied away from making the hard decisions that often resulted in shattered relationships and broken trust. For years, he had built an empire with ruthless tactics, and to some, he was considered a genius, to others, he was a tyrant. However, there was one thing that even Victor couldn't escape: his own ego. Victor had always been known to pull the strings from behind the scenes, manipulating those around him for his personal gain. But there was one person who had managed to slip through his control: Audra Charles. Audra, a young, ambitious woman who had arrived in Genoa City with big dreams and an even bigger secret, had become a powerful player in the corporate world, despite her youth. She had met Victor in the most unexpected of ways, and from their first encounter, she had caught his attention. Audra was intelligent, calculating, and not afraid to take risks, qualities that Victor respected, even though he was usually one to dismiss anyone who didn't fall under his control. But over time, something had begun to change between them. Victor had allowed Audra into his inner circle, and for a brief moment, they had even begun to work together, though never as true partners. Victor always kept his cards close to his chest, and Audra, ever perceptive, began to sense that Victor had his own agenda. She soon realized that he wasn't playing the game for the same reasons as her. When Victor started betraying his allies, even those closest to him, Audra's suspicion grew. She had heard whispers that Victor was planning to double-cross her, using her for his own schemes and then discarding her like all the others. But Audra wasn't the type to sit back and let anyone get the best of her. She had learned from the best, after all. Her father had been a ruthless businessman, and she had inherited his sharp instincts. She knew how to play the game, and she wasn't about to let Victor win. Victor, however, wasn't about to let Audra get the upper hand either. He had always seen her as a means to an end, a tool to further his empire. He didn't care about her aspirations, her goals, or her dreams. He only cared about his own power, and Audra had become yet another pawn in his endless game of domination. It wasn't long before Victor's betrayal of Audra was set in motion. He had learned something about her, a secret from her past, that he could use to his advantage. He had gathered information, and now it was time to leverage it. Chapter 2: The Betrayal. Audra had always been careful about her past. She had built her life carefully, keeping her secrets buried deep. But when Victor learned of the scandalous truth, he wasted no time in using it against her. One evening, Audra received a phone call from Victor. His voice was cold and calculated, as usual. Audra, he began, his tone dark, I've come to a decision. You've been useful to me, but I think it's time for you to step aside. Audra's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly regained her composure. Victor, you can't do this. We've worked together for months. You promised me that we were building something. Victor's laugh was humorless. You were never more than a tool to me, Audra. You think I'd ever truly trust you? I know all about your little secret. The one you've been so desperate to keep hidden. Audra's blood ran cold. She had suspected for some time that Victor was playing a dangerous game. But now the truth was out in the open. He knew her secret, and worse, he intended to use it to destroy her. You wouldn't, she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Try me, Victor said, his voice laced with malice. I will expose everything, and you'll be finished. With that, he hung up the phone, leaving Audra alone in the darkness of her own thoughts. Her mind raced as she processed what had just happened. Victor had betrayed her, and now he was holding her past hostage, threatening to destroy her if she didn't do exactly what he wanted. But Audra wasn't one to be intimidated. She had spent years carefully crafting her image, her business dealings, and her reputation. She wasn't going to let Victor take that away from her. Chapter 3. The Plan? As the days passed, Audra's sense of betrayal turned into a burning desire for revenge. She wasn't going to let Victor think he could just walk all over her. She had learned from the best in the business, and if there was one thing she knew, it was how to make a person regret ever crossing her. Audra began to formulate a plan. She would use Victor's own tactics against him. She would manipulate him into trusting her once again, only to bring him down from the inside. She knew that Victor's ego was his biggest weakness. He believed he could control anyone, anything. Audra would use that against him. She began to plant seeds of doubt in Victor's mind. She subtly started making him question his own decisions, feeding him information that made him second-guess his own actions. Every move was calculated, every word carefully chosen. She needed to make him feel like he was in control, but little by little, she would tighten the grip around him. Meanwhile, Victor, in his arrogance, believed he had won. He thought Audra would crumble under the pressure, that she would fold in the face of his threats. But he didn't know Audra the way he thought he did. He didn't realize that she was playing a far more dangerous game than he could ever imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between them grew. Victor continued to try and undermine Audra, while Audra quietly plotted her next move. She had to be patient. This wasn't a game of instant gratification. It was a slow burn, and she was willing to wait. Chapter 4. The Shifting Power. Audra's plan was coming to fruition. She had started to turn the tables on Victor, feeding him false information that would make him lose trust in those closest to him. She had planted doubts about his allies and manipulated situations to make him feel isolated. Slowly but surely, she was eroding the foundation that Victor had built his empire on. But Victor wasn't completely blind. He began to notice the subtle changes in his world. People he had relied on for years were beginning to question his decisions, and his trusted inner circle was growing restless. It was clear that someone was behind this, someone who was working to destabilize everything he had worked for. The more Victor realized that something was amiss, the more paranoid he became. He turned on those around him, lashing out at anyone he suspected might be involved in the plot against him. But there was one person he never suspected, Audra. She had become the perfect puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows. As the pressure mounted, Victor's facade of control began to crack. The ruthless businessman who once seemed invincible was now on the verge of losing everything. And all the while, Audra watched from the sidelines, a silent observer of his unraveling empire. But her ultimate goal was never just to watch Victor fall, it was to take him down herself. She wanted the power that he had, and she would stop at nothing to get it. Chapter 5. Payback. The moment of reckoning finally arrived. Audra had successfully maneuvered Victor into a corner, and now the final blow would come. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, manipulating the people around him, and setting up the perfect trap. Victor's own mistakes had made this moment inevitable. Audra had one final card to play, Victor's biggest weakness, his family. She knew that Victor cared about his family more than anything, and she knew exactly how to use that against him. She had been quietly gathering information on his children and his most trusted confidants, knowing that if she could turn them against him, she would break him completely. The date of reckoning came when Audra confronted Victor in his office. She had set the stage perfectly, and as she walked into the room, she could feel the tension in the air. "Victor," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "It's over." Victor, who had once exuded confidence, now seemed cornered. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You've played your hand, Audra, but you've underestimated me." Audra smiled, a dark glint in her eyes. "No, Victor, you've underestimated me." Audra smiled, a dark glint in her eyes. "No, Victor, you've underestimated me." She placed a file on the desk in front of him. Inside were documents that would bring his empire to its knees, evidence of his illegal dealings, betrayals, and secrets he had long kept hidden. "This is just the beginning," Audra said. "I've already sent copies to the people who matter. Your family, your partners, your enemies. Everyone will know the truth." Victor's face twisted in rage as he realized the extent of her plan. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. As Victor stood there, helpless and defeated, Audra turned to leave. "This is just payback for what you did to me," she said, her voice low but filled with triumph. And with that, she walked out of his office, leaving Victor to face the consequences of his own betrayal. Victor Newman, once the titan of Genoa City, stood at the precipice of his empire's collapse. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. His mind raced, trying to piece together how things had spiraled out of his control so quickly. He had been too sure of himself, too confident that no one could ever outsmart him, especially not someone like Audra. As he sat in his office, the weight of her betrayal crushed him. He had underestimated her. He had thought she was just another ambitious young woman, looking to climb the corporate ladder. He had used her, manipulated her, thinking that she would be loyal, that she would play her part in his grand schemes. But Audra had played him. She had seen through his manipulation and had turned the tables in the most cunning of ways. Victor's mind flashed back to their first encounter, to the way she had walked into his office with that confident air, that fearless glint in her eye. He had been intrigued by her, but now he realized just how dangerous she had been from the start. She had been playing him the entire time, making him believe she was simply a tool in his hands. But now she had taken everything from him, his secrets, his power, his control. He stood up from his desk, pacing the room, his thoughts spiraling. His family, his legacy, all of it was at risk. He had tried to protect them, to shield them from the consequences of his actions, but Audra had outmaneuvered him at every turn. His children, especially Victoria and Nick, had always been a source of pride, but now even they seemed uncertain of their allegiance. How could he have let it come to this? Victor's mind wandered to his other children, Adam, whom he had pushed away countless times, and Abby, whose loyalty he had never questioned. Yet even they seemed distant, like pieces in a game he no longer controlled. The betrayal was not just coming from Audra. It was a betrayal from within his own family, his closest allies. Chapter 7. Audra's Next Move. As the days passed and the fallout from Victor's betrayal spread, Audra watched from the shadows, feeling the rush of power that came with her calculated triumph. She had expected resistance, but what surprised her was how quickly Victor's empire began to crumble. His family was fractured, his business dealings exposed, and his most trusted associates were suddenly questioning everything they had once believed in. The dominoes had fallen, but Audra wasn't done yet. She knew that taking down Victor was only part of her plan. She had her sights set on something far greater than just revenge. She wanted to reshape Genoa City's corporate landscape, to claim the throne that Victor had once occupied. Her first order of business was securing her position in Newman Enterprises. The company had always been the heart of Victor's empire, and now it was ripe for the taking. She knew that Victor's children would soon be forced to choose sides, and she intended to make sure they knew which side was the winning one. Audra had already been in contact with several key figures within Newman Enterprises, quietly assembling a coalition of people who had long been dissatisfied with Victor's reign. There were those who had been pushed to the sidelines, those who had been overlooked or underappreciated. Now, Audra would bring them into the fold. Her plan was simple. She would offer them the power and influence they had always craved in exchange for their loyalty. And in return, they would help her secure her place at the head of Newman Enterprises. Victor had been a force to be reckoned with, but Audra was a force of nature. But there was one more thing she had to consider: Victor's children. They had their own agendas, their own ambitions, and she would need to navigate their desires if she wanted to truly claim the throne. Victoria was ambitious, but she was also fiercely protective of her father's legacy. Audra had watched her from a distance, carefully observing her every move. Victoria might not be as easily manipulated as Victor had been, but Audra was confident that she could make her an ally, or at least keep her at bay. Nick, on the other hand, was more of an enigma. He had always seemed to straddle the line between loyalty to his father and his desire to build his own path. Audra knew that Nick's loyalty could be swayed, and she intended to exploit that. As for Adam, Audra hadn't yet decided where he fit into her plans. He had always been a wild card, someone who could either help her or become a dangerous adversary. But for now, she kept him in her sights, watching and waiting. Chapter 8. The Battle for Control. The tension in Genoa City was palpable. The once impenetrable walls of the Newman Empire were beginning to crack, and everyone could feel it. Audra had played the long game, and now she was reaping the rewards. But as she carefully orchestrated her next moves, she knew that Victor's children would soon have to make their own choices. The first to take the bait was Victoria. She had always been her father's most trusted heir, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin. But the betrayal, the constant manipulation, it had taken its toll. Victoria had become disillusioned with Victor's methods, even though she couldn't bring herself to fully turn her back on him. Audra saw this as an opportunity. One evening, Audra invited Victoria to a private meeting. The two women sat in a quiet restaurant, away from the prying eyes of the Newman family. Audra had prepared her pitch carefully, knowing that Victoria's loyalty was not easily swayed. But she also knew that Victoria had longed for a chance to step out from her father's shadow. "Victoria," Audra began, her voice smooth, "you've been carrying the weight of your father's empire for years. You've always been the one to clean up his messes, to hold everything together when it seemed like the world was falling apart. But how long will you continue to do that? How long before you realize that you deserve more than just to be a footnote in his legacy?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I've worked my whole life to build this company, Audra. I'm not some naive young woman who's looking for a shortcut." Audra smiled, sensing the crack in her resolve. "I'm not offering you a shortcut, Victoria. I'm offering you control. If you want to take the reins of Newman Enterprises, you have to make a choice. Will you stand by your father as he destroys everything he's built, or will you stand with me and reshape this company into something that works for you?" Victoria hesitated, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She had always been fiercely loyal to her family, but Audra's words struck a chord. Could she continue to follow a man who had never truly given her the respect she deserved, or was it time to break free? Before she could respond, Audra leaned in, her voice low and persuasive. "You and I both know that Victor will never give you what you want. He'll always see you as second best. but I'm offering you something different. Together, we can make Newman Enterprises stronger, more innovative, and more secure than it ever was under his rule. Victoria's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was a spark of something more. Could she trust Audra? Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Chapter 9. Nick and the Family Divide. Meanwhile, Nick was beginning to sense the growing tension between his family members. He had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to keep things together, but even he could see that things were unraveling. His father's betrayal of Audra had been a catalyst, and now his siblings were divided. Nick had always been close to his father, but he wasn't blind to Victor's faults. He had watched for years as Victor manipulated everyone around him, using them as pawns in his endless game of power. But could Nick truly side with Audra? Could he betray the man who had given him so much, even if Victor had taken so much in return? Nick was torn. He had never been one to follow blindly, but the idea of working with Audra, of breaking free from his father's control, was a tempting proposition. He had his own vision for the future, one where he didn't have to answer to anyone but himself. But could he make that leap? Could he truly walk away from his family's legacy? As he pondered his options, Audra's influence grew stronger. Nick knew that the next few weeks would determine the fate of Newman Enterprises and his own future.